Sometimes life throws us into moments we could never expect, and one simple mistake can reveal secrets that change everything. That's exactly what happened to me when my sister accidentally sent my son's lunchbox to my house instead of his school bag. It was such a small, ordinary thing, something that should have meant nothing more than a quick laugh and a phone call to sort it out. But when I opened that lunchbox, thinking I might just repack it for my son, I froze. Inside there wasn't just food. There was something else hidden carefully beneath the sandwich and juice box. Something that shook me to the core. My hands trembled, my chest tightened, and for a moment I thought maybe I was imagining it. But it was real. The lunchbox was supposed to be filled with snacks and fruit, but instead it contained something I never dreamed would be connected to my family. My sister's mistake was no accident of fate. It was a door opening into a truth I had been blind to. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. My heart raced as my mind filled with questions. Why was this in my son's lunchbox? Was my sister involved in something I didn't know? Was my child in danger? What began as a normal morning suddenly turned into the most shocking day of my life. I had no idea that this small, everyday object, my son's little lunchbox, would reveal secrets, betrayal, and choices that would tear through the trust one thought I had in my family. That moment was the beginning of a story I never wanted to live but could never escape. It was one of those hectic mornings where everything seems to move faster than it should. The sunlight poured in through the kitchen window, casting warm patterns on the floor, but it did little to calm my nerves. My son Sam was running around trying to find his favorite sneakers, while I scrambled to prepare breakfast and pack his bag. Between spooning cereal into a bowl and checking the time, I was already thinking about the endless errands waiting for me later. That's when I heard the doorbell ring. It was my sister Laura, unexpectedly early. She usually came later in the day, so seeing her there with a bright smile and a bag in her hand was unusual. "Morning. I think I grabbed the wrong bag for Sam," she said as she held out a lunchbox. She looked flustered but cheerful, brushing back a strand of hair that had fallen over her face. I barely had time to register her words before she practically shoved the lunchbox into my hands and turned to leave. "I'll sort it out later. Just keep it for him," she added, her voice slightly hurried. At first, I barely noticed what she had handed me. It was just a lunchbox, nothing extraordinary, something I did every day, filled with a sandwich, fruit, and maybe a snack or two. I placed it on the kitchen counter while telling Sam to finish his cereal. But something made me glance at it more closely. The lunchbox was heavier than it should have been. Not unbearably heavy, but heavy enough to catch my attention. Curiosity got the better of me, and I unlatched the lid. Inside, everything seemed normal at first glance. There was a neatly wrapped sandwich, a small juice box, a banana, and a tiny packet of cookies. But as I moved the sandwich to grab the apple, my hand brushed against something unusual at the bottom of the box. My fingers felt a small, oddly shaped object wrapped in black plastic. I hesitated for a second, heart fluttering with a strange mix of fear and curiosity, before pulling it out. What I saw made me gasp. It was a bundle of money, tightly wrapped in a way that suggested someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. I couldn't believe my eyes. My hands shook as I lifted the bundle, the weight of it more shocking than the money itself. There were stacks upon stacks of bills, neatly organized and bound with rubber bands. I counted quickly in disbelief. Thousands of dollars, far more than I could imagine just sitting in a lunchbox. For a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming or that my eyes were playing tricks on me. How could something like this be in my son's lunchbox? What was my sister thinking? I had known Laura for my entire life, and while she had a reputation for being a little careless and dramatic, she had never shown any connection to anything remotely criminal. My stomach churned as I tried to make sense of it. I called her immediately. My hands trembled as I dialed, and I listened to the phone ring, hoping she would answer and somehow explain this away. But she didn't. It went straight to voicemail, and when I tried again it was the same result. Panic started to creep in. Why wasn't she answering? Was she in danger? Or was she hiding something? The questions swirled in my mind like a storm, and every scenario seemed worse than the last. Finally I left a text. "Laura, there's something in Sam's lunchbox. Call me back immediately." I didn't expect an answer right away, but minutes later my phone buzzed. Her reply was short and cryptic. "Don't open the lunchbox. Please just give it back." That made my blood run cold. Why would she tell me not to open it after it was already in my hands? The fear in her words was clear, even in a text. By the time she arrived to pick it up, I was a bundle of nerves. I had barely touched anything else in the kitchen, not wanting to disturb the lunchbox more than I already had. When Laura walked in, she seemed unusually tense, her eyes darting around as if she expected someone to be watching. She didn't smile or make small talk like she usually did. I held the lunchbox out silently, watching her hands tremble slightly as she took it. Her voice was barely a whisper as she muttered, "Thanks, and please just forget you ever saw it." But I couldn't. The moment I had opened that lunchbox, the ordinary morning had transformed into something entirely different. Even after she left, I couldn't shake the image of that money from my mind. I tried to focus on Sam and his breakfast, but every time I glanced at him, my chest tightened. Was he safe? Had he unknowingly carried that lunchbox somewhere? I felt an overwhelming need to understand what was happening, to somehow untangle the web that my sister had created. I kept replaying the morning in my head, thinking about her hurried words, her panic, and the odd way she avoided eye contact. It wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, safety, and the hidden life I had never imagined my sister might lead. The day dragged on with a heavy weight pressing on me. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, hoping for a call or a message that would explain everything. But nothing came. I tried to act normal for Sam, playing games with him and helping him with homework, but my mind was elsewhere. Every sound made me jump, every car on the street seemed suspicious, and every time I thought about Laura, my stomach twisted with a mix of fear and frustration. It was one of those days when you realize that life is fragile, that normalcy is an illusion, and that one small mistake, a lunchbox mix-up, can pull back a curtain to a reality you never wanted to see. That evening, curiosity got the better of me again. I went through the motions of cleaning the kitchen, but I kept glancing at the spot where the lunchbox had sat. Even though it was gone, the memory of it lingered. I found myself imagining all sorts of scenarios. Debt, theft, danger. My sister had always seemed a little reckless with money, but this was on an entirely different level. I thought about the people she might be involved with, the places she might have gone, the secrets she might be keeping. Fear mingled with anger as I realized I had no real knowledge of her life outside of the family bubble I thought we shared. It was like meeting a stranger for the first time, someone I had always known but never truly understood. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept tossing and turning, thinking about the lunchbox and what it meant. I imagined Laura delivering that money, perhaps to people who weren't safe, perhaps caught in situations that could escalate quickly. I thought about Sam, innocently carrying a lunchbox filled with danger without ever knowing it. The idea that a simple mistake could put my child in harm's way made my heart race. I realized how delicate our lives were, how easily one wrong choice could unravel everything, and how little control I really had over the world outside my front door. The next morning, my mind was still clouded with worry. I called Laura again, trying to be calm but failing miserably. This time she answered, but her voice was strained and quiet, almost like she was holding back tears. "I didn't want you to see that," she said immediately, as if reading my thoughts. I asked her why, and she hesitated before admitting that she had gotten herself involved with people who were dangerous. The money in the lunchbox, she explained, was part of a repayment she owed to them. She said she hadn't wanted anyone to know, especially me, because she was afraid it would endanger Sam or me. Listening to her, I felt a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that she was explaining, but horror at realizing how close we had all been to danger without even knowing it. Even with her explanation, the feeling of unease didn't leave me. I couldn't stop thinking about the lunchbox, about the thousands of dollars, about how fragile the line between safety and danger really was. It had started as a simple, ordinary morning, but that small, unassuming object had opened my eyes to a hidden reality. The trust one had in my family felt fragile, like glass, and I wondered if things would ever be the same again. I spent the rest of the day trying to regain some sense of normalcy, but it was impossible. Every time I saw Sam eating his lunch or packing his bag, I remembered the weight of that black bundle. I realized that life could change in an instant, and that even those closest to us can hold secrets that shatter our sense of security. By the time night fell, I was exhausted, not from physical activity, but from the emotional roller coaster that one morning, one lunchbox, and one mistake had thrown me onto. I had entered that day thinking it would be ordinary, predictable, and safe, but it ended with fear, uncertainty, and a deep awareness of how little I truly knew about the people I loved most. And so, the chapter of that morning closed not with clarity or relief, but with a lingering sense of tension, a knot of worry that wouldn't easily untie. The lunchbox, innocent in appearance, had become a symbol of hidden truths and unspoken dangers. It had changed the way I saw my sister, my family, and the world around me. And as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The next morning, the memory of the lunchbox and the hidden bundle of cash haunted me as soon as I opened my eyes. Sleep had been restless, filled with fragmented images of my sister, strangers, and my son unknowingly carrying danger in his backpack. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to know more, that I couldn't just let the situation slide without understanding the full truth. I had spent hours replaying the incident in my mind, trying to piece together what Laura had been involved in and how far her actions might have endangered not only herself but our entire family. As I made breakfast for Sam, I watched him move around the kitchen, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. His innocent laughter and chatter were a stark contrast to the heavy tension weighing on me, and it made me painfully aware of how thin the line was between ordinary life and chaos. After dropping Sam off at school, I couldn't go back home and pretend everything was fine. I had to know more about Laura, had to follow the breadcrumbs she had left behind. I didn't plan to confront her immediately. I just needed to see where she was going, who she was meeting, and what kind of world she had been secretly inhabiting. It felt strange and almost wrong to spy on someone I loved, but fear can make people do things they never imagined. I kept a safe distance as I followed her car through the city streets. Laura drove cautiously, glancing at the rearview mirror more than once, which made me realize she might have been on edge already. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned each corner carefully, making sure I wasn't seen, my eyes fixed on her car as if my life depended on it. She led me to a part of the city I had never frequented, where the streets were narrower, buildings older and slightly run down, and the atmosphere heavier than anywhere else I had been that morning. She parked, and I watched her get out, carrying a large bag that looked suspiciously heavy. Two men were waiting near a dimly lit alley. I couldn't make out their faces clearly, but there was a palpable sense of danger surrounding them. Laura walked straight up to them and handed over the bag. I wanted to call out to her to stop her, but I stayed hidden, heart racing as I realized the reality of what was happening. The bag she handed over could very well have been the same one that had ended up in Sam's lunchbox, and it was now in the hands of people who could hurt her, or worse, hurt anyone who got involved. My stomach twisted in fear and nausea as I realized just how reckless her actions had been and how close we had come to disaster. For several minutes, I watched in tense silence as she exchanged words with the men. I couldn't hear everything, but her gestures and the way they moved made it clear that there was a serious, potentially dangerous transaction taking place. I felt a cold sweat form on my forehead, and my fingers gripped the edge of the car window so tightly that they ached. I wanted to turn away, to run home and forget I had ever seen this, but I knew I couldn't. Knowledge now came with responsibility. I had to understand everything before it spiraled further out of control. As Laura finished her exchange, the men disappeared quickly, and she stood there for a moment, looking around nervously, as if checking to make sure no one had followed her. I held my breath, hoping she wouldn't notice me, and when she finally got back into her car, I followed her at a distance again, every nerve in my body alert. She drove slowly this time, as if unsure of where she was going. I noticed a shift in her demeanor. She seemed smaller somehow, weighed down not just by the bag she carried, but by the fear that surrounded her. It was then that I realized that the Laura I had always known, loud, bold, a little careless, was not the Laura operating in this hidden world. This was a version of her that I had never met, a version forced into actions that were desperate and dangerous. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How many times had she hidden something in Sam's lunchbox or used other innocent objects as a cover? What could have happened if I hadn't noticed the first time? My chest tightened with both fear and anger, and I knew I needed answers, even if they were painful. After several more turns, she finally stopped at a small, unremarkable apartment building tucked away behind a strip of shops. She looked around once more before getting out and heading inside with her bag. I parked a few blocks away and waited, debating what to do next. Should I follow her inside, confront her, or wait until she left? Each option carried risks not just to me but to Sam as well. The longer I waited, the more I felt the pressure of the unknown pressing on me. My mind flashed back to the lunchbox again, the casual mistake that had opened this door. I had to face the truth. Laura had been risking not only her safety but the safety of everyone around her, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I spent the next few hours in my car watching the building. People came and went, some carrying bags, others simply walking by, oblivious to the tension brewing inside. I noticed Laura leave briefly, walking to a small convenience store nearby. She looked over her shoulder constantly, and when she returned, she brought a small paper bag back with her. It wasn't much, but every action seemed loaded with meaning, like she was part of a delicate and dangerous dance she had been forced to learn. I tried to piece together her patterns, trying to understand what each step meant. I realized that she was incredibly careful, meticulous even, despite the chaos that her actions had thrown into our lives. This was not someone simply careless. This was someone trapped in a situation that required extreme caution. By late afternoon, I knew I couldn't just follow her anymore. I had seen enough to understand that she was in serious trouble, and that continuing to watch her could put both of us at risk. I decided to go home and confront her directly, to force her to explain what was happening. When I arrived, Sam ran up to me, oblivious to the tension in my face, hugging my legs and asking about his homework. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to relax, to remember that some parts of life were still normal. But as I carried him inside, I couldn't ignore the heaviness in my chest. Laura would have to answer for this, and I needed to understand everything before it escalated further. When she arrived that evening, I could tell she was bracing herself for a confrontation. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a tense stiffness and wary eyes. I didn't waste words. I asked her point-blank about the money, about the men, about the lunchbox, and about every secret I suspected she was hiding. She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she set her bag down on the table. Then, almost breaking into tears, she began to explain. She told me that she had gotten into serious financial trouble months ago, had borrowed money from people who were dangerous, and had been forced into delivering cash to them to repay her debts. She admitted that the lunchbox had been a horrible, careless mistake, and that she had never intended for me or Sam to see it. As she spoke, I could see the fear in her eyes, the weight of her desperation, and the conflict between wanting to hide the truth and needing to come clean. I listened, my emotions a mixture of relief, anger, and sadness. Relief that she was still safe, anger that she had put us all in danger, and sadness that the person I had always trusted had been forced into a world of threats and lies. It was hard to reconcile the sister I had known with the one confessing to me now, and I realized that family bonds, while strong, could be tested in ways I had never imagined. We spoke late into the night, discussing her options, how to stop the dangerous cycle she had been caught in, and what steps needed to be taken to protect herself and, most importantly, Sam. I felt the heavy responsibility of keeping him safe pressing down on me, and I knew that the situation required careful planning. This was no longer about curiosity or suspicion. It was about survival, about ensuring that my son remained unaware of the dangers that had briefly touched his life. Every detail she shared, every confession, added layers to the story I had stumbled into accidentally, starting with a lunchbox that should have been harmless. By the time Laura left, promising to start making changes and cut ties with the dangerous people she had been involved with, I felt exhausted but slightly hopeful. The first step toward resolving the crisis had been taken, but the lingering tension remained. I couldn't shake the memory of the lunchbox, the hidden money, and the glimpse of the dangerous world that had intersected with our lives. I knew that the next steps would require vigilance, careful decisions, and constant awareness of the risks that surrounded us. That night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts kept returning to the lunchbox, the day of following Laura, and the revelations she had shared. The ordinary world I had once taken for granted now felt fragile and uncertain. I realized that life could change in an instant, that even the people closest to us could harbor secrets, and that sometimes we were forced to confront dangers we had never imagined. It was a heavy lesson, one that started with a simple mistake but had grown into a reality I could no longer ignore. The line between safety and chaos had been crossed, and I knew that the weeks ahead would test my resolve, my judgment, and my ability to protect the people I loved most. The following week felt surreal, as if the ordinary rhythm of life had been replaced by an invisible tension that clung to every moment. I couldn't stop thinking about Laura, about the men she had been dealing with, and about how close we had come to disaster. Every time Sam asked me a question or laughed at something silly, a part of me flinched, imagining the lunchbox incident repeating in some other, more dangerous form. I had started checking everything twice. The mail, the groceries, even Sam's backpack, hyper-aware that the smallest mistake could unravel the fragile sense of safety we had left. But amidst the fear, a growing determination took hold. I had seen the reality Laura was caught in, and I knew I couldn't stand idly by. I had to understand the full extent of what she was involved in, even if it meant putting myself in uncomfortable or risky situations. One evening, after Sam was asleep, I sat down with a cup of tea, trying to piece together the fragmented information I had gathered so far. Laura had confessed to owing money to dangerous people, to delivering cash to them, and to hiding the transactions from everyone she loved. But there were gaps. Details she hadn't shared, names she hadn't mentioned, locations she had avoided explaining. I knew that if I wanted to protect my family and help her, I needed the whole picture. I began planning carefully, thinking through the possibilities, considering. The next day, I decided to confront the practical realities. I started by going through Laura's past patterns. Her recent phone calls, the addresses she had visited, the timing of her trips. I wasn't snooping maliciously. I was trying to understand what we were up against. Each small detail revealed something important. Certain locations she had gone to repeatedly suggested a hierarchy, an organized operation, not a random or chaotic one. Certain times of day she traveled indicated a system of payment or delivery, rather than casual exchanges. The more I studied, the more I realized just how deep she had been pulled into a dangerous world, and how precarious our position was. My stomach knotted at the thought of Sam being involved unknowingly. Later that afternoon, I decided to visit her apartment under the guise of casual concern. I knocked, expecting to be met with her usual guarded demeanor, but I wasn't prepared for the relief that washed over her face when she saw me. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she admitted immediately, her voice trembling. She explained that the fear of retaliation from the people she owed money to was becoming unbearable, and that each delivery felt like stepping closer to a cliff she might not survive. I listened silently, trying to absorb the weight of her confession. The mix of fear and exhaustion in her eyes was almost unbearable. She was terrified, but she hadn't given up entirely, and that small glimmer of hope gave me a sense of purpose. I knew then that I had to help her, not just confront her, but actively find a way to untangle this dangerous web. We spent hours talking in hushed tones, mapping out what she owed, the people involved, and potential ways to reduce the risk. I was shocked by how organized and methodical these dangerous contacts were. This wasn't some simple loan gone wrong. It was a carefully constructed system of intimidation, designed to trap her in a cycle she couldn't easily escape. I realized that the lunchbox incident, which had seemed like an isolated mistake, was actually a symptom of a much larger problem. A problem that could have consequences far beyond what I had imagined. Every new piece of information made the situation feel heavier, more complex, and more frightening, but it also strengthened my resolve. I couldn't let my sister face this alone, and I certainly couldn't let Sam ever be in the middle of it again. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept going over every detail, imagining scenarios where Laura was confronted by these dangerous people while Sam was home. I pictured myself intervening, trying to protect him, and my chest tightened with the realization that fear could cloud judgment in those moments. I made mental plans, thinking through ways to mitigate risk, contact authorities if necessary, and shield Sam from harm. But I also knew that exposing Laura too soon could worsen the situation. It was a delicate balance. One wrong move could make things much worse. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, with my family's safety hanging in the balance. The next morning, I noticed small changes in Laura's behavior. She was quieter, more cautious, and constantly checking her phone. It was clear that the stress of her situation was taking a physical toll on her. I decided that I couldn't rely solely on her words. I needed concrete evidence of what was happening so that, if necessary, I could involve the authorities safely. That afternoon, I arranged to accidentally bump into her while she was leaving her apartment. I followed her at a safe distance as she drove to an unfamiliar part of the city, and I watched her interact with someone I hadn't seen before. The exchange was brief, and I couldn't hear much, but the small bag she handed over confirmed my suspicions. This was not a one-time mistake or random act. This was a recurring pattern, and the danger was very real. The more I observed, the more I realized just how carefully Laura had been forced to operate. Every movement, every interaction, seemed calculated to avoid detection or retaliation. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of admiration and frustration. She was incredibly brave, but she had been thrust into a situation she shouldn't have faced in the first place. My mind raced as I considered ways to help her extricate herself safely. I thought about calling the police, but I worried about the potential backlash if the people she owed money to found out. I thought about trying to negotiate directly, but that felt far too dangerous. Every option seemed fraught with risk, and yet doing nothing was not an option either. By the evening, I decided to confront her directly about what I had observed. When I arrived at her apartment, she was sitting on the couch, visibly drained, clutching the small bag she had just retrieved. I sat down across from her and spoke calmly but firmly. "Laura, I've seen enough to know that this isn't just about a lunchbox mistake. You're in real danger, and we need to figure out a way out before it gets worse." She looked at me, her eyes wide with fear and desperation, and finally nodded. It was the first time I felt she was truly acknowledging the severity of the situation, rather than trying to minimize or hide it. She explained more details about deadlines, amounts owed, and threats she had received, painting a picture far more serious than I had anticipated. I felt a cold knot in my stomach as the reality set in. Our lives had been brushing against disaster all this time, and I had no choice but to act. We spent hours strategizing that night, making lists, assessing risks, and discussing possible solutions. Laura promised to stop making deliveries on her own, but she admitted she didn't know how she would manage her debts without outside help. I suggested contacting a financial advisor or even seeking legal counsel to find ways to protect her while minimizing danger. She hesitated, terrified of involving outsiders, but eventually agreed that some help was necessary. It was a fragile plan, but it was a start. For the first time since the lunchbox incident, I felt a glimmer of control amidst the chaos. That night, I lay awake thinking about the delicate balance of our lives. One small mistake, a lunchbox mix-up, had exposed a hidden world of debt, fear, and danger. It had forced me to see Laura in a new light, as someone both brave and trapped, and it had reminded me of how unpredictable life could be. I realized that family bonds could be tested in ways I had never imagined, and that protecting the people I loved required vigilance, courage, and careful planning. As I drifted off to sleep, I resolved to stay close, to monitor the situation, and to do everything I could to ensure that the next crisis never reached Sam. The chapter of discovery that began with the lunchbox had only deepened, and I knew that the next steps would require even greater awareness and resilience. The days following our intense conversation felt like walking on a tightrope, where any wrong move could send everything crashing down. I kept a careful eye on Laura, making sure she followed the plan we had discussed, and I became acutely aware of every little detail of her life, every interaction, every phone call, and every step she took outside the house. Sam remained blissfully unaware of the tension surrounding us, playing with his toys and doing his homework as though the world was perfectly safe, and it broke my heart to know how close we had come to danger without him knowing. Laura, on the other hand, seemed increasingly worn out. Her energy was fading, her shoulders slumped, and her eyes had a haunted look that hadn't been there before. I wanted to comfort her, to reassure her that everything would be fine, but I knew the only way to keep her and Sam safe was to stay focused, alert, and ready to act if needed. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. My heart raced before I even answered, and I instinctively knew that it might be related to Laura's situation. The voice on the other end was curt, demanding, and vaguely familiar from my observations over the past week. They asked questions about Laura's whereabouts and her recent actions, and I could feel the danger in their tone. I kept my voice calm, carefully answering enough to satisfy curiosity without giving away anything critical. The call ended abruptly, leaving me with a sense of unease that clung to me like a shadow. I realized that the people Laura had been involved with were now aware of some disturbance, and that we could be closer to exposure than we had anticipated. Fear mingled with determination. I knew I had to act quickly, decisively, and carefully, or everything could spiral out of control. I decided it was time to gather more concrete evidence of the threats surrounding Laura. I started by reviewing the addresses, times, and interactions I had observed previously. I realized that patterns were emerging: predictable locations, repeated contacts, and subtle signals of warning. I began documenting everything meticulously, making notes of phone numbers, times, places, and any unusual behavior. I also considered reaching out to authorities, but I hesitated, fearful that involving them prematurely could escalate the situation. This required careful calculation. Every move had to be deliberate, every decision weighed against the potential consequences. Laura's life and Sam's depended on it. That evening, Laura confided in me something she had not shared before. She admitted that there had been moments when she had been followed, when unknown cars had lingered near her apartment, and when strangers had approached her at unusual hours. The fear in her voice was palpable. I could see her trembling, and it became painfully clear that this was no longer just a financial entanglement, it was a matter of personal safety. I listened intently, suppressing my own rising panic, and began planning in my head how to protect her without putting myself or Sam at risk. I realized that staying close to her physically was important, but that it also needed to be discreet to avoid drawing attention. The following day, I arranged to accompany Laura on a trip she claimed was necessary to resolve one of her remaining obligations. I didn't tell her I intended to follow every step. I simply acted as if I were offering moral support. The city felt different that day. Each street shadowed and unfamiliar, and every turn seemed fraught with potential danger. We stopped at a small, secluded location, and I watched closely as she handed over a package to a man I didn't recognize. The transaction was quick, almost perfunctory, but the intensity of her movements, the careful way she avoided eye contact, and the nervous glances she cast around the street told me everything I needed to know. This was a world I had never imagined my sister living in, and the stakes were higher than I could have anticipated. While waiting nearby, I noticed a pattern in the way these men operated. They were always in pairs, always alert, and always ready to leave at a moment's notice. It was a subtle choreography of power and control, and I began to understand why Laura had been forced to operate in secrecy. I realized that her mistakes, no matter how small, could have severe consequences, and that the Lunchbox incident had been an almost miraculous stroke of luck that no one had been hurt. My heart ached for her, for the choices she had been forced into, and for the invisible chains that bound her to a world of fear and obligation. After the delivery, we returned home, and I could see that the tension in Laura hadn't eased. She was exhausted, her face pale, her hands slightly shaking, and I realized she had been carrying this burden alone for far too long. I tried to comfort her, reminding her that she didn't have to face this alone anymore, but her eyes betrayed the depth of her anxiety. She admitted that she had been terrified every day, worried that one wrong step would bring retribution. I knew she was right to be scared. The men she had been involved with were calculating, organized, and dangerous. But I also saw resilience in her, a determination to protect her child at all costs, and that gave me a renewed sense of purpose to help her navigate this nightmare. As the week progressed, I began to notice subtle changes in our neighborhood. Strangers lingered near our home, cars slowed as they passed, and small details that I had ignored before began to feel significant. I realized that we were being observed, and that the danger was closer than we had imagined. The weight of that realization settled heavily on me, but it also solidified my resolve. I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I had to act strategically, using observation, caution, and planning to ensure that Laura and Sam remained safe. Every movement, every decision became deliberate, calculated, and careful. I felt the weight of responsibility pressing on me, heavier than I had ever known, and I understood that the next steps would be critical to our survival. One night, Laura confided a secret that made my blood run cold. She revealed that she had been threatened directly. Someone had warned her that failure to comply with her obligations would result in harm to her family. The fear in her eyes was unlike anything I had seen before. I felt an icy panic grip me, but I forced myself to remain calm, realizing that panic would not help either of us. I listened carefully, absorbing every detail she shared, while formulating a plan in my head to counteract the threats. It became clear that we had crossed a threshold. This was no longer about debt or money. It was about safety, survival, and protecting the innocent from harm. The next day, I began taking practical steps to protect Sam and myself. I changed routines, drove different routes to school, and kept a vigilant watch on our surroundings. Every phone call, every knock at the door, and every passing car was analyzed, filtered through a lens of potential danger. I became hyper-aware of patterns, behaviors, and timing, understanding that even a small lapse in attention could have serious consequences. The sense of constant vigilance was exhausting, but I knew it was necessary. Laura's world had intersected with ours in ways I couldn't ignore, and I was determined to protect my family at all costs. By midweek, it became clear that Laura could no longer handle her obligations alone. The stress and fear were overwhelming, and the risk of exposure was increasing. I decided to intervene more directly, offering to assist her in managing communications, tracking transactions, and understanding the behaviors of those she was involved with. She was hesitant at first, fearful that my involvement would escalate the danger, but eventually she agreed that some support was necessary. Together we began constructing a detailed plan, mapping out safe routes, potential escape strategies, and backup options in case situations escalated. It was meticulous, exhausting work, but I could see the relief in Laura's eyes as she realized she was no longer facing this alone. By the end of the week, I felt a cautious optimism. We had gained more control over the situation, and Laura was beginning to understand how to operate more safely. But the danger was still present, lingering in the background like a storm cloud ready to break at any moment. The Lunchbox incident, which had started this entire journey, remained vivid in my memory, a small object that had revealed a hidden world of fear, secrets, and survival. It had forced me to confront realities I had never imagined, and it had solidified my determination to protect the people I loved. As I tucked Sam into bed that night, his innocent laughter filling the room, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We had survived this far, but I knew that the most critical challenges were still ahead, and that vigilance, courage, and careful planning would be essential in the days to come. The following days were a tense blur, a delicate balance between vigilance and exhaustion. Laura and I had begun implementing the safety plan we had constructed, carefully monitoring her interactions, changing routines, and avoiding predictable patterns. Every decision was deliberate, every movement calculated. Despite the exhaustion, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time, I truly understood the stakes, and I was determined to see this through to the end. Sam remained blissfully unaware, his laughter and energy a comforting reminder of why we were doing all of this. Protecting him had become my singular focus, the anchor keeping me grounded in the midst of chaos. Each time I watched him eat breakfast or pack his school bag, I felt a surge of protectiveness and a fierce determination to shield him from the dangers that had suddenly intruded into our lives. One morning, Laura received a message that made her visibly tense. I peered over her shoulder as she read it, the words sending a chill down my spine. The message was from one of the men she had been dealing with, terse and threatening, indicating that they were aware something had changed and that they expected immediate compliance. My stomach knotted, and I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down harder than ever. There was no room for mistakes now. I calmly suggested that we meet in person to discuss a solution, and Laura reluctantly agreed, knowing that avoiding them entirely might provoke even more danger. We spent hours planning, rehearsing what she would say, what I would do, and how to ensure that Sam remained completely out of harm's way. Every detail was scrutinized, from the route we would take to the way the meeting would be approached, as if we were preparing for a high-stakes operation. When the day of the meeting arrived, my nerves were taut. We chose a neutral location, a busy cafe with plenty of people around, hoping that visibility would deter any aggressive actions. Laura clutched my hand briefly before we entered, a small gesture that revealed her fear but also her trust. We spotted them immediately. Two men seated at a corner table, eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I felt my pulse quicken, but I forced myself to breathe slowly, to remain calm and alert. Laura approached them first, handing over a small package she claimed was the remainder of her obligation, while I stayed a few steps behind, carefully watching every gesture, every expression. The men examined the package, their eyes narrowing, their body language rigid and calculating. I could sense the tension radiating from them, and I knew that one wrong word or movement could tip the balance. The negotiation that followed was tense and painstaking. Laura spoke quietly but firmly, offering explanations, reassurances, and a plan to gradually repay the remaining amount in a way that minimized risk to all involved. I stayed silent, observing, ready to intervene if the situation escalated, heart pounding in my chest. Minutes felt like hours as the men considered her words, their eyes flicking between her and me, their expressions unreadable. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they nodded and accepted the plan. It was a small victory, but a critical one, proof that careful planning, honesty, and courage could sometimes navigate even the most dangerous waters. Laura exhaled deeply, relief washing over her, and I felt a surge of gratitude that we had made it through unscathed. Returning home, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. The immediate danger had been mitigated, but I knew we weren't completely free. There were still debts to resolve, relationships to untangle, and a lingering sense of vulnerability that we couldn't ignore. Over the following days, Laura focused on implementing the repayment plan safely, keeping meticulous records and following the strategies we had devised. I helped her manage communications, monitor patterns, and maintain awareness of potential risks. The process was slow and careful, but each successful step reinforced the sense of control we had gained over a situation that had once seemed impossible. The tension in the household gradually eased, though I remained vigilant, knowing that the world Laura had been drawn into was not something that could be undone overnight. As the weeks passed, life began to regain a semblance of normalcy. Sam's routines returned to their familiar rhythm, and he remained blissfully unaware of the dangers that had brushed against his life. Laura grew stronger, more confident, and more determined to stay free from the influence of the people who had once controlled her. I continued to support her, providing guidance, encouragement, and vigilance, while also allowing space for her to rebuild her independence. It was a slow process, but progress was visible, and with each passing day, the shadow of fear that had once loomed over our lives grew smaller. I realized that resilience, careful planning, and unwavering focus were the keys to navigating even the most perilous situations. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, the tension finally lifting, Laura shared a story about the first time she had ever felt trapped by these obligations. She spoke quietly, almost to herself, recounting the fear, desperation, and isolation she had experienced. Listening, I felt a deep empathy for her struggle, understanding for the first time just how much courage it had taken to survive and protect her family. I realized that the lunchbox incident, which had seemed like a simple mistake, had been the catalyst that revealed a hidden world of danger and forced us to confront realities we might never have anticipated. It was a turning point, a moment that reshaped our understanding of trust, family, and the delicate balance between safety and risk. Over the next few days, Laura began to take control of her life in ways that were deliberate and empowering. She reached out to legal and financial advisors, set boundaries with people who had once threatened her, and focused on rebuilding a stable, secure environment for herself and Sam. I watched her transform, her confidence returning, her anxiety diminishing, and her sense of independence growing stronger. The relief I felt was immense, an acknowledgement that even in the face of danger and mistakes, recovery was possible. I knew we would never forget the lessons learned, but I also recognized that resilience, honesty, and courage could guide us through even the darkest circumstances. One afternoon, while Sam played in the yard, Laura and I sat together, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. We spoke honestly about mistakes, trust, and the fragile nature of life, and I realized that our relationship had been irrevocably changed, not weakened, but strengthened by the trials we had endured. The lunchbox, once a simple object, had become a symbol of discovery, courage, and survival. It had forced us to confront truths we might have ignored and had shown us the importance of vigilance, careful planning, and unwavering love. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for our survival, but for the bond that had been forged in the crucible of danger and fear. As weeks turned into months, the threat from the dangerous people gradually faded. Laura continued to follow the repayment plan, and each successful step diminished the risk and restored a sense of normalcy. I remained vigilant but no longer paralyzed by fear, knowing that careful planning, awareness, and courage had carried us through. Sam's laughter filled the house once more, innocent and carefree, a reminder of why we had fought so hard to protect him. Laura, too, had reclaimed her life, her confidence returning, and her sense of autonomy strengthened by the challenges she had faced. It was a slow but steady restoration of peace, built on lessons learned the hard way. In the quiet moments of reflection, I understood that life could change in an instant, that ordinary objects could reveal extraordinary secrets, and that courage and vigilance were essential to protecting those we loved. The lunchbox, once an unremarkable part of a morning routine, had become the key to uncovering a hidden world, to facing fear, and to ultimately reclaiming safety and trust. I realized that even in the most ordinary moments, life could surprise us, challenge us, and reveal truths we might never have imagined. The story of the lunchbox ended not with chaos or loss, but with survival, resilience, and the restoration of trust. Laura had faced danger, made mistakes, and learned to navigate a perilous world, and I had been there to guide, support, and protect her and Sam. Together, we had weathered a storm that began with something as simple as a misplaced lunchbox and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever before. The experience left an indelible mark on all of us, a reminder that life's ordinary moments can hide extraordinary secrets, and that courage, love, and vigilance are the keys to overcoming even the darkest challenges. In the end, I held Sam close one evening, watching his peaceful, innocent sleep, and I knew that we had survived not by luck alone, but through careful planning, courage, and the unwavering determination to protect family. Laura sat beside me, a quiet strength in her presence, and I realized that despite the fear, the mistakes, and the danger, we had found our way back to safety. The lunchbox, once a symbol of hidden secrets and potential disaster, had led us on a journey of discovery, resilience, and redemption. And in that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that while life would continue to throw challenges our way, we were ready to face them together, stronger and wiser than before. Don't miss out on more thrilling stories. Like, comment, and share your thoughts. Subscribe to Twisted Fate Chronicle for shocking twists and unforgettable tales.